Bonjour à tous, je suis Kerenn ELKAԻM de Livres Hebdo et je suis ravie de vous présenter l'auteur Bill Burl. L'auteur américain est né à Trenton dans le New Jersey. Il a fait des études de relations internationales et s'est spécialisé en histoire de diplomatie. Il multiplie ensuite les vies et les casquettes. Côté pile, il s'inscrit dans l'histoire familiale en présidant Pearl Properties, Pearl Broadcasting and Pearl Publishing, à l'image de son personnage principal. Mais côté face, ce rotarien pratique différentes formes d'écriture. Outre des discours officiels, il a publié des chroniques dans 800 journaux américains, ainsi que de la poésie qui est apparue notamment dans le Time Magazine ou des recueils comme Heart Songs et China Heart. Après un premier roman qui s'appelle Cœur brûlant, Paris 1968, voici sa suite Mission à Paris 1990 aux éditions L'Harmattan. On y suit Robert Samberg, un magnat des médias américains qui va brusquement être confronté à son passé. Alors que son pays et le Vietnam sont en pleine guerre, il va connaître une magnifique histoire d'amour avec My Hanh. Les voilà réunis pour une mission délicate au cours de laquelle il va découvrir qu'ils ont eu un fils ensemble. Comment dès lors retisser les liens politiques et intimes? C'est ce que nous allons découvrir ensemble. Alors je vous rappelle que comme il s'agit d'une rencontre interactive, vous avez la possibilité de poser vos questions au cours de ce chat. Donc n'hésitez pas. Hello Bill Pearl and thank you for being with us today.
Hello, Kerenn.
You write that sometimes silence is more efficient than words. Did you grow up in a world of silence or a world of words and books?
No, I grew up in a world of all three. But before I elaborate, I want to thank you and thank everyone at Livres Hebdo for having me here today. It's a special pleasure to be here. And I thank our listeners in French for bearing with me in my speaking English. My French vocabulary is somewhat less than necessary to carry on this interview in French, so I will be speaking in English. No, I think silence is sometimes extremely important because it gives us the opportunity to use body language. And I've read that a large percentage of what we as humans communicate to one another comes from our body language more than our words, or as much as our words. And so in that sense, silence, I think, it can be a very good thing.
And when did books become really important to you?
Wow, ever since I was a boy. My first job was at my prep school in New Jersey, the Pennington Prep School, working in the library. My sixth grade teacher inspired me as a writer in the feedback that he gave me about the work I submitted. And so really from when I was very young, I had a passion for books. I used to run a little bookstore inside the library for paperback books. People would come and buy them. I would set up the little library. It was it would open up like on a roll open with all the paperbacks of some of the great American novels, and then I'd have a cash box and I would sit and sell the students paperbacks if they wanted them. So, and I have kept every book that I have obtained in school, all the books that you get through grade school, high school, well maybe not grade school, I'm exaggerating, high school, college. I've kept all my books. I have a library at home that's extensive because I never throw away a book, never. I like having them around me. There's a certain feeling I get from being in a room full of books that is very beautiful. It's very important to me. So.
What about poetry? When did poetry become so important to you, and what's the power of it?
Wow, I have written poetry for many years, mostly like so many people for my own pleasure. I joined a group at home where I live in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, called Poets of the Palm Beaches. And through the auspices of being in an organization, I participated in readings and published the two chapbooks that you mentioned. And I was very, very pleased to win awards. Poetry to me is the highest form of verbal expression. You attempt to say the most with the fewest words. And so when you do that successfully as a wordsmith, which is what I think of myself, I'm a person who loves to work with words. And when I'm writing a poem and something works, and I have the economy of using very few words to create a meaning that has some power to it, that to me is very, very fine experience. I just love it. So.
You were saying that silence is sometimes important, but would you say that you write against silence, whether it's silence of history or silence of personal stories? Because as you know, in French, histoire with a big H for history is the same word as the personal history, small h, histoire too.
I don't quite get I don't fully understand the use of the word silence in that context. I'm not quite sure I'm understanding your question. So maybe
because silence has given us a lot of gaps in family stories, in personal stories, but also history that doesn't want to see some episodes of its story because it's too dark episodes. So would you say in that sense?
Oh, okay.
That
you mean in the sense of not wanting to talk about things, whether at a societal level or at a personal level.
Exactly.
That kind of silence.
Yeah.
Wow. Big subject. I'm not sure what to say. I think that there are, on a personal level, oftentimes really difficult things that are personal that are hard to say to another person. And so I think part of being an effective adult and a responsible adult is when there is something compelling inside, whether it's me or any person, that you feel like you need to say, is finding the courage to say it in a way that's loving and inclusive, but that's also truthful. And if you're a true friend to someone, then you oftentimes are in a situation where you have to ask yourself, well, should I say this? They may be offended by it, but if you are a true friend to someone, then you oftentimes, at least I have the criteria that I follow where I will say what I think, even if I know it's something they may not want to hear. On the societal level, it's different. My view is that on the societal level, everything should be spoken of. I don't believe in hiding the collective decisions and choices that people in a group make. Sometimes they're terrible in history. Sometimes people do very, very extraordinarily horrible things, sometimes beautiful things, but I think it all should be there. It's part of humanity, it's part of history, it's part of following developing a better understanding of human nature and society and politics and everything that goes along with it.
What's important too is memory, which is very present in this book. Why is it so essential to understand the present?
In the book, you're talking about, give me an example of what I'm not sure I follow in the book. When you say memory, you mean?
Memory of the past, whether it's the past of a country, the past of a person. Why is the past so important?
Because in honestly examining the past, whether we're talking about the character of My Hanh and Robbie, who are two lovers who haven't seen each other for 22 years and suddenly find themselves together again in the book, or whether we're talking about the war between the United States and Vietnam, which is the context of the story. You learn from the past. You learn from, if you can, you learn from the past. It's an opportunity to learn. And so that's the way I view that. Did that answer the question?
Sure.
Okay.
Is it a passion that you had very young on, this passion for history, this passion for the past?
Yes. I have been interested in history. It was reflected in my choices in university. It was reflected in my, more so even in my choices of what I read and and I'm always reading a history book. If a new book comes out on a historical character, you can be sure I'll be downloading it and reading it. I read when I'm on my bike. I bike quite frequently at home, and I put the headphones on, my earphones on, and I read, and it's a joy to me. And to explore history through the eyes of someone who's done the homework to really better understand a person in history or a circumstance is a real pleasure, and it's important, I think.
What about the history of diplomacy that you studied, but it's also present in this story you're telling us?
I would say the same thing. It's a part of my interest. I didn't set out to write this novel based on the idea of writing a history book. I used history as a context to tell a story, an exciting story, but a love story at the same time. And as I've reread the book more recently in preparation for this interview, the book became more exciting to me. I didn't realize, because it's been a while since I wrote it, but when I reread it, I thought, wow, this is really exciting. It keeps moving forward, and it's got a lot of action in it, but it also has the entanglement of conflict of a father and a son, and a man and a woman, and there's a tremendous amount of interpersonal complexity built into the story. And I try, with the help of the people I work with in editing it and refining, I try to bring to a resolution these kinds of conflicts and show the characters as they change. And it's sometimes very complicated to do that, because you have only a limited number of moments, and you're trying to show that a character like Robert Samberg, who was a very sad man, alcoholic, viewed his life, his criteria for success, purely economics, purely wealth, showing off with his Macallan whiskey, buying the most expensive bottle, and so you have a character like that who then has to evolve into someone who changes, and so this is the magic of constructing a story and character development and plot lines and the like. So I don't know if did that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
All those points are very important for the story, but what's also very important for you when you build up this plot are the different places you choose where you bring us, where we travel with you as a writer. How do you choose these places? Why are they almost characters on its own?
Wow. Well, Robert Samberg is American, and so and he's now a successful businessman, office in New York, so New York is there. He lives on Palm Beach. My parents, when I lived on Palm Beach. Palm Beach is a rather exclusive seaside town in Florida in the United States. So that became part of the story. And of course, in the case of New York, it's a city that I can't say that I know it intimately, but I know it well enough to be able to describe it. I make an effort to bring life and accurate context to the places in the story. And for that reason, I visited, for example, Hanoi, the temple, Naksun Temple on Jade Island. I went there and I saw all the things that I describe and fictionalize in the story. And same is true for Auvergne. I have a special love for Auvergne because during a Rotary program a number of years ago in 2010, I had the pleasure of meeting some just wonderful Rotarians. I hope he won't mind mentioning his name, Michel Aubert. And later I met the mayor of teaching me what it means to be Auvergnat. And my editor had told me before I wrote this book, Bill, get to the roots, get to the roots. He pointed to a tree at a cafe near the publisher's headquarters, and he pointed to the roots. He said, get to the roots. And the way I took that to mean try to show the depth of places that you and people, but places where you go. And I tried to do that with Auvergne. I tried to take from what I had learned from the people I met and to put it into the story. So hopefully that I succeeded. I hope I did. Yeah.
What about Paris? Paris is so present to you, whether it's in your life, in the book, in the titles, where it keeps coming back. Why do you have such a special link with this city?
I was a student here in 1968, and I don't know how better to answer that question than just to say that. This was a different era. This was the year of the student rebellion in the city, and rebellions that took place in college campuses across the world, really. And I was a witness to these things. I think there's some similarities to the character of Robbie Samberg as I described him in the first book, with aspirations as a writer, as a creative person, and myself as a writer and a creative person. The allure of Paris historically as the capital of culture in the world for centuries have brought waves of American artists in different spheres to the city. And I think I'm no different than those that came before, although certainly not as well known, but no different in terms of the feeling of freedom and the feeling of respect for words and the feeling of the love of language and aesthetics that you find in Paris that certainly in other time periods you didn't find in other cultures, and that I think still exists today. I think of my editor, my publisher, La Matante, Xavier Prien, he supports writers all over the world in a beautiful way, and very much in keeping with the culture of France, of being supportive of literature, being supportive of language in a very beautiful way. So these are the things that attracted me then, and these are the things that continue to attract me to Paris today.
Before we go further into the book, maybe we can hear some of your written words, if you want to read us something, Bill?
Well, okay, I will. May I read it in English? Is that okay?
Sure.
I could read it, I have it in French, but there are many parts of the story that I enjoyed writing and that I enjoy reading as well. But one of the most crucial is where Robert Samberg is recovering in a fictional hospital in Auvergne, created by the author. Doesn't exist. And My Hanh comes to visit him. And he's reflecting to her that when he is able to go home, he is recovered, he's going to go visit his father, with whom he's completely estranged, as happens in families often, more often than you'd like to think. And so he says to her, he asks her, says to her, "Do you have any advice for me?" And she thinks, and she goes, "Well, 3 things." And she reaches for his hand, and they fall silent for a moment in her thoughts. And he looks at her and says, she says, "All right, well, what things, what?" And she says, "First, when you see your father, take a breath and admit to yourself that you are suffering." He looks quizzically at her. Right, he says. And then she says, "Find the courage to tell him or show him that you're suffering." He looks down, he's getting a little skeptical, he doesn't quite know where this is going. He goes, "Right, sure." Then she says, "Find a way to tell him that he is suffering too." And he looks up and says, "You think he is?" And she says, "I know he is. That's what's below his armor and yours." And he says, "So we're both victims?" "Yes," she says. "And tell him you need his help. You want to understand him. I'll probably get punished." "You will," she says, "and you must bear it like you've borne the pain in your body during this hospitalization." "And after," she asks, and after he asks her, what happens? She says, "Become a refuge for him so he can become a refuge for you." And he says, "You make that sound easy." And she says, "It is, Robert, if you open your heart." And in those words, I think those words strike at the heart of something important about the book, because the book really, at the interpersonal level, is about reconciliation. within ourselves, which is a part of what was said there by My Hanh, and between us. And we're living in a world today where that's so needed. It's so necessary at all levels. I saw a report from an article from the Mayo Clinic in the United States said that a quarter of the families in the United States have a member of the family who is no longer talking to another member of the family. A quarter, 25%. It's extraordinary. And think of the political situation in the United States, in France, where in liberal democratic societies, people have become increasingly polarized. So there's a real need to think a little differently about the importance and the power and the way to achieve reconciliation.
We'll talk about that, but to understand the reconciliation we are talking about, it's also the reconciliation between two countries, because Vietnam is very present in that book. What's your link to this country? What's your link to the Vietnam War?
Personally, I was among the Americans who intuitively understood in the beginning, when I was a young man and the war was begun in the 60s, that it was not going to end well. I had a sense that it would not end well, that a country like the United States, using its military technology to accomplish societal, political change in a culture totally misunderstood, not at all understood by the very people directing the policy, whether at the military level or the political level, would end up disastrous. And that's exactly what it became. I don't know how or why, but I knew that. I knew it. And so, like many people of that time, I spoke out, I wrote, I had a column like the character in my book for the university newspaper. I wrote about it. I did all that I could at the level that I could to express my concerns. And I had a lot of the experiences that Robbie Samberg in the first book has in dealing with the societal, the social pressure of being against the war, which at the time in the 60s was very popular, and the majority of Americans supported the war. And if you didn't, it was not such a comfortable thing until later. Later there became a more universally accepted view, maybe not universally, but more widely accepted view that there's a problem here. When Walter Cronkite, the paragon of truth in the US media, visited Vietnam and said, you know, this is not happening the way it needs to be happening. Those are not his words, but he cast doubt on the outcome as to whether or not there could be a victory in the mildest way that a very high up journalist had to do in those days. You couldn't go as far then as you can today. When that happened, I think Lyndon Johnson knew he had a big problem. So I'll stop there.
You quote someone else in your book, which is Clinton, who declared in 1995, "The history we leave behind is painful and heavy, but we may not be controlled by it." Why did it take so long for those two countries to reunite?
Wow, it's a good question. I can't answer that question. I don't know why. I know, of course, the subject of this book, of the mission in Paris, is a fictional gestation of the peace process. It did not really happen that way. This is a fiction that I built to show a possibility for how, even before Clinton was president, when George Herbert Walker Bush was president of the United States, there were, because of a concern with the rise of China, which was real, that was a real political issue in that time, not like it is today, but quietly among policymakers, there were concerns. And there were also, there was a recognition that engaging with a former enemy, like Vietnam was during the war, could have constructive results economically for both sides. That's a reality that I think existed. The story told in the book is fictional, but it's plausible based on the facts of what happened. The question that you asked about why it took so long, I can't answer that question. There were probably political factors, there are probably a number of factors that went into that, but it would require a study of that particular, element of diplomacy to really understand why it took the time that it did. And it didn't happen until 1995, really, so, yeah.
Inside Robert, who is the main character of the book, this reconciliation will take also a lot of time in his life. And he says at one point, I knew that war was a disaster, like you were saying. Why do you never feel the same at two sides of a war as you are showing us? That one side, I mean, both sides suffered, but one sees it one way, one sees it another way. And what about the invisible scars that are also very present in the book?
Yeah, there are lots of invisible scars at the personal level in the book between Robert and his son. Robert and his son, that he finds out about Robert and his father, and societally, you know, there are a lot of conversations in this book. And in those conversations, one of them, for example, at the historical level, is when My Hanh is telling, I think it's My Hanh who says to Robert, well, I think there were 58,000 Americans who died in Vietnam, and that's terrible. Robert, do you know that the American military killed 1 million of our soldiers and 2 million of our civilians? She says this is not a moral equivalence. This is not the scale of damage and destruction done by the United States military in Vietnam is not on the same scale as the Vietnamese did defending themselves and their long-held right to self-determination and to not have a divided country, to unite their country. Lots of scars there. One of the things, the beautiful, if I go on too long, I'll just make this short, but one of the most beautiful things that I experienced when I visited Vietnam to research the book is to see how the Vietnamese people have forgiven America. It is extraordinary, whether from the children to the people of all ages. When I went, I thought, how are they going to greet an American? I mean, it's like just as late as 1970, under President Nixon, we bombed Hanoi, Haiphong. Thousands of people were killed. You know, people alive when I was there must have had relatives, friends, people that they knew or their families or otherwise who died. And yet they have a very forgiving, Vietnam is a young country, but there's a very forgiving attitude as I saw it, as I felt it as an individual. That's a beautiful thing, I think. It's something very special that I experienced while I was there. Not sure if I answered your question.
You did.
Okay.
But it's also a novel about forgiveness. Forgiveness is at the heart of that book. What does it mean to forgive, whether it's to a country, whether it's between two human beings, or even to yourself?
Wow, big question. From my point of view, it's the realization that if you carry anger with you, if you carry it with you, you do more damage to yourself. You do as much damage to yourself as you do to the person you're angry with. And so I think, my personal view is there's a self-interest in forgiveness as a way of moving forward in life, because otherwise you carry things with you that eat up your spirit, that take you to a place where you can't have the joie de vivre. You can't, because you're stuck in the past, and so it's better to understand and forgive, and that's the same. It's the same, I think, with societies as it is with people, with families. I had a beautiful thing happen to me when I was in Chartres just recently. A woman came up to me. Her name is Leslie, and she said to me, "Bill, I read your book, and after I read your book, I'm not talking to my sister. There was a dispute over the inheritance from my mother who died. We were fighting with each other and we don't talk to each other anymore." And she read the book and saw the examples in the book of reconciliation. She said, I picked up the phone, I called my sister, and I stayed away from the jugular issue that had them divided, and I just started to forgive, to move it forward, move the relationship forward. And now I don't know whether to bring it up or how to bring it up. I said, well, maybe you shouldn't maybe you should just let it go. It's already done its damage. But that's for her to decide. But I felt so good as an author to hear someone affected by the story in that way. Wow, whoa. I was like
it's
really
great.
very, very happy. I was very happy. It was wow.
As you write it, seasons change, government changes, people change. We are all changed by life. But why do certain emotions like love never change?
Well, wow, I don't think I'm qualified to answer that question. I mean, I don't know. I can't answer that question.
But your characters do.
Well, my characters are dealing with something unique in among humans. It's love at first sight. In the first book, the hardest chapter that I wrote in the first book was the scene where they fall in love. My Hanh is on the metro. She's attacked by a soldier, and Robbie sees her. But the moment their eyes meet, it's one of these, you know, these like all the boundaries drop, and they just that happens. I think it's a biological thing, really, in part. But with them, it happened, and it stayed with them, and their lives became a lot more complicated. But 22 years later, Robert admits as a grown man that he's never gotten over that feeling of having fallen in love with My Hanh, and even through the pain of losing her, which he did, he lost her, and he thought he lost his son because, but it turns out in the second book he did not lose his son. But through all that pain, he still carries the flame, the embers in his heart of this love that he has, this passionate love that he has for her. And I think that happens in real life. It happens. I mean, maybe not always, and you know, I don't think it, but that's part of the book, and I guess it's part of life. You'd have to invite an expert in love to answer that question better than I could. I was just creating characters and trying to make an interesting story, and you know, so I did, but that's a whole topic in of itself, complex, very complex.
And what's so special about this flame you're talking about when it concerns its first love?
Continuing to ask me that. You won't let me go. Huh? Well, I think it's more powerful when you're younger. Biologically, you know, the human race is designed biologically to survive, to procreate, and so there are certain, I think, chemical reactions in our bodies that, you know, compel that. Just like, you know, hunger makes us want to eat, so we take care of ourselves. Thirst makes us want to drink. Well, you know, so I don't think the feeling of falling drop dead in love is only a modern phenomenon. It probably happened in caveman days too. But I think, I'm guessing, I'm not an expert, so if there's an expert out there, you can chat. I'll be glad to answer anything in the chat, except questions like this, which I don't really know what I'm saying. No, but I mean, I think that it's a phenomena that has probably, I'm guessing, always existed. And it's more powerful when we're younger because we feel, you know, those feelings may be new and they are very powerful. The endorphins that get released when we're in love is a very beautiful thing. It feels good, you know. If there was a way to bottle it and sell it, there would probably be a...
Is it also very special in this book and the story you imagine between those two characters because it's a forbidden love? It's a love that you put in a special context, which is this war of Vietnam with America. What makes this love even more special because of that?
I think you're right there. I think that is part of what makes the story interesting, because they've fallen in love and they're from countries that are at war, and making it even more complicated, she's the daughter of Le Duc Than, who's a fictional Vietnamese member of the Politburo and a great military leader, loosely based on a real person, but not so, a fictional person. And he is an American, you know, who has no idea that she's from North Vietnam and that her father is, you know, is this very high level figure with the North Vietnamese government. So it makes it complicated, but it doesn't change the feelings they have. That's at a personal level. The context of political level is something that just complicates it. But And I think it makes the story interesting, but they still fall in love. So.
Although both are very different, can they be seen as a mirror, one of the other, because they have those strong ideologies that they are really struck to, both of them?
You know, they have a lot in common. In rereading the book, I realized that when I read My Hanh's dream that she repeatedly had when she was a girl about growing up in a patriarchal society where the male has all the authority and all the power, and she was different than that. She wanted different than that, and she was haunted by this dream her whole life, and she became very ambitious as a young adult and as an adult through the political sphere to try to make up for not wanting to become subservient in the way that in any kind of patriarchal society many women are. And then he, on the other hand, also haunted by dreams of his father who mistreated him, who passed over him in the family business, who didn't give him the attention because his father was unable to do so. And as a young boy, you don't understand why your father does that. All you know is when a parent doesn't give you attention, it's probably because you think there's something wrong with me. And so Robert is haunted by these dreams, and his life becomes about proving that he's going to be worthy of his father, worthy of being on the sign, the father and son in business, which is part of the plot of the story. So both of them are kind of striving in their adult life to offset things that happen to them that are recurring fears that they have. And so in that sense, I think they have a lot in common. And they both progress as characters in the book to move beyond that, to realize that what they're doing, why they're doing it, and that realization gives them a platform to make changes in their lives.
Why did you want to explore this society you're speaking of through the character of a woman who refuses her role? I mean, in Vietnam, women are not supposed to be that ambitious. They are not supposed to have political roles. Why did you imagine her that way?
I did. I can't explain why. I mean, it just felt. When you write a story, the story takes on a life of its own as you move things forward. You think of things, you want to make things interesting. So to create a character who's just like everybody else is not very interesting. So you try to create a character who's going to do things that are, asymmetrical and who will find themselves in conflict and have to resolve the conflicts and that sort of thing. And so that, I don't know, that's just I didn't set out to do that quite that way, but it just occurred that way, that she became this way. And as 22 years later, I just took the progression of how she was when she was younger and posed it as the life of a person that's now mature, has responsibilities, but still has great ambitions, and of course has to face ultimately the need to choose between her love for her son and Robert, and obeying the direct orders she got not to do something. I won't say what because it'll give away the story,
sure.
but she found herself in that position and she had to decide. So, and then she had to live with herself afterwards because she paid a big price to do what she does in the story. Does that answer the question? I'm not sure if I'm...
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
You were speaking about price, and it's true that this price of this specific love is very heavy for both of them. Living it has a special price, and being separated one from each other has a different price. Why did you want to explore that, this price of love, of impossible love?
I ask you, is it impossible love? I don't think, reading the book, I mean, well, someone who read the book, another person who read the book said to me, Bill, it was a very good book, but in France, he said to me, stories never end. Oh, I shouldn't say this, it'll give away the endings.
No,
but,
don't tell
okay.
me.
Well, I'll just say that in France, the story would have a more tragic ending. And this book, in terms of the question you asked, poses the possibility that they can ultimately be together. And so I don't know that it's an impossible thing to have happen, at least in this story.
Yeah.
I'll stop there.
It seems impossible also because there's something very specific in those times. In Vietnam, it's about My Hanh, because My Hanh couldn't be a mother. She could have been a mother if she had married a Vietnamese, which wasn't the case, because there is this terrible word called bouilloire, I don't know if I pronounce it well, which means dust of life, terrible, and which was the term used for children born from American or Asian parents, both of them. Why is that so terrible, this term of saying you are just a dust of life?
Well, I don't know if that's a literal translation. I think that my guess is that it's this age-old concept that when people are different, when you have a culture and a race of people marry or have children with another race, whether it's black and white in America, whether it's Vietnamese and American in Vietnam, I think probably in other societies it exists as well, that it's a really big challenge to accept people who are different, who are a part of one culture, a part of one race, and a part of another race. Maybe it's just a human phenomena that exists. In Vietnam, and it depends on how strict the society is, there can be all kinds of variations of this. I would generally say, in terms of my personal view, it's a terrible thing. Because whether a person has partly the genetics of a Caucasian person and partly the genetics of a Vietnamese person, they're a person, and they should be accepted for who they are without judgment. But cultures and religions oftentimes make really harsh judgments. And it's sad because it excludes people and makes people feel less than and small, and it's a terrible thing when that happens, but it does happen. And that's what was related in the book about the children of American soldiers and Vietnamese women. It was a big problem for them in Vietnam. So.
And in the US also.
Yes, and in the US also. Yes, absolutely.
Now, it's paradoxal because in Vietnam it's a society based on family. Family is really the center of the country. So how do you explain such a paradox?
Well, maybe that's the reason why it's that way, because family is so important. The idea of accepting variations in a family becomes more challenging. But no, I can't say that I am enough of an expert in Vietnamese culture to properly respond to that. I utilize what I learned in order to create the story, but I don't pretend that I am an expert in the nuances of Vietnamese culture. There are lots of regional differences in Vietnam, as there are in America. Human beings are so complicated. We are really complicated. And so it's like you have to be really careful about generalizing. But I tried to take things as I use them in the book, like this feeling that My Hanh had about protecting her father by not by having to not accept her son and find a way to hide her son in plain sight, and not admit even to him that she is his mother. This is, it's complicated and it's sad, but it's what was just made the story more interesting and more textured, and particularly how it comes out in the end. Because, and she, it's very clear in the story that, notwithstanding the fact that she needed to do what I just described, in terms of not recognizing her son, she loved him she loved him totally. Didn't matter, she loved him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Her son, Anne, which is an important character in the book also,
yes,
is also a very paradoxal child. I mean, child and adult afterwards, because How can he grow up when a part of his identity is totally unknown?
This is a conversation that Robert has with My Hanh. You're doing damage to our child by what you did. You didn't tell him who his real father was. I guess I shouldn't give it away, but Robert is his real father.
In the beginning.
Okay, so Robert
we don't spoil the whole
Robert
thing.
is his real father, and that is an ongoing element of conflict between My Hanh and Robert. And I think My Hanh was, in a sense, selfish. She was thinking of her career. She was thinking about protecting her father's position in society. And so she did what she thought she needed to do. But later in the story, she admits to Robert, what I did was wrong. It was wrong. And she says it to him. But it takes time for her to realize that. That's part of her growth as a character. That's shown in the story, in the book.
Now Robert has this official mission, but he will discover another mission, which is fatherhood. Usually you have 9 months to become a father. And he becomes a father very late on in the story of his son. So what does it mean to him to become a father that suddenly?
Well, it meant everything, because he never had a father himself. His father was estranged from him. He was estranged from his father. He very much knew 22 years before in the first book that My Hanh was with child. He wanted desperately to be a father like his father could not be to him. He wanted that. There was a side to him that was paternal, maternal. He wanted that. And it was denied, for reasons that he thought that she was that her father sent her back to Vietnam and to terminate the pregnancy, and that's what he believed happened. And so he had a combination of disappointment, anger, sadness, mostly sadness about that. And he thought that his opportunity to be a father was gone with the woman who was his first love. And then he gets to Vietnam 22 years later on this mission he's asked to perform, which he only performs because he needs to, not altruistically. He kind of has some reasons that he needs to do it, so for his own self-interest. And of course he finds out that My Hanh did not terminate the pregnancy, that his son is alive. And then, so it is suddenly thrust upon him that he is a father. And then it's like, what do I do about this? How do I handle this? And he's angry. He's angry at her. He's angry, period, because he's angry with himself for not having gone and followed her back in 1968. And he's just very angry and upset at first. And then the story is a progression of events which enable him to kind of reconcile these things and through a very interesting set of circumstances.
There's another character who is constantly angry also, full of hatred, which is Anne, the son. Why did he lose himself so much in destructive ideologies?
Why? When people are, I think when younger people live with the pain of not knowing who they are, of not having parental support, not having narcissistic love shown to them, they're more open to aberrational thinking and aberrational, behavior. And there is one point in the story where Robert says to My Hanh, when they're stuck together as captives in a hostage scene, and they're together for a while, and Robert says to him, so you adopted Mao as your father. You didn't have a father that who was there for you, so you adopted Mao as your father. And Anne says, I wish Mao were my father. He's this and he's that, and then he proceeds to describe Mao Zedong as an ideal candidate for being father, because for reasons that he expresses in the story. So yeah, I think that's part of why An went in the direction that he did in terms of his radicalism and his friendship with radicals of other ideologies as well.
The story of father and son relationship, which can be often very complicated, as you were saying, is also present in your own life, of course,
Yes.
because we are all the son or the daughter of a father. How would you describe the link you had with him and this reconciliation that is the theme of the book, but was also the theme of your relationship with your father?
Well, I would say first, I would not have been able to write this story without having been through a divisive and difficult situation with my own father. This was the raw material at the emotional level I could pull and use to tell a fictional story. I loved my father deeply, and my father was a very bright, very fine man in so many ways. But like a lot of men in his generation, he was absorbed by his work. He was absorbed by things other than his children. And I carried with me a lot of pain around that, as did other members of my family, my sisters. And so, but I think one of the things I'm most proud of, speaking again personally in my life, is that notwithstanding the fact that I had really dark times with my father and had suffered greatly, some of the instances of my suffering I wove right into the story, changed the context. But notwithstanding all that, and this is a lesson I think I'm happy to share with others, I stayed with it. I stayed with him. I continued to see him. I never gave up on the idea that eventually he might see me differently and that we might see one another differently. So when he got older, and he died, I think in 2015 from Alzheimer's, well before that, we would begin to have lunch every week, and we would talk about the times we were in business together. And it was one of the things that I think I'm most proud of in my life, that I never did what I was describing before, said, I'm washing my hands of you. I stayed with it. And ultimately, he saw me differently, and we reconciled and had a really wonderful, warm relationship at the end of his life. So it's possible. I can speak from experience. That's possible. If you're out there and you have a parent or a sister or a brother and you're not talking to each other and you're angry because of who knows what, I mean, sometimes it's the silliest thing, and you're not talking, you're denying yourself something that can be a very beautiful part of your life, which is a contact with a loved one from the same family. And you don't need to. You can work around things if you work at it, if you try, if you stick with it. So.
That's what the book is also showing us, because it's a novel about peace, whether it's between countries or whether it's inner peace. Why is it so important to make peace with yourself also?
I think that's always important, to have a life that's a good life. We all have limited time. Life's not forever, it's limited. So I think, and it's sometimes a struggle to sustain inner peace. You know, if you're like me and you're constantly questioning, you're constantly wondering, well, did I do this right? Am I supposed to be doing this? What are the, life is not easy, life is hard, but the idea of searching and trying to find a path where you forgive yourself and forgive others and understand before you forgive, so that you know why it's important to forgive and what you're forgiving for, I think is important. And it's just the difference between a life better spent and a life where you've lost so much because you've never gotten over things and you're in your own way all the time. And life is too short to be in your own way. It's better to take the joy of the moment as much as you can. And so that's just my personal view.
Mm-hmm. My Hanh has this dream of freedom that really drives us, drives her and drives us as a reader. In what way do you feel free?
I do feel free. I do feel free. I didn't always feel free. My Hanh did not always feel free as a character. I think it took for her getting to the point where she could understand why she was driven along in the political sphere as she was, wanting to be the first female chair of the party and making sacrifices to accomplish that. And I think she ultimately came to a point where she realized there were other things more important than that. And that's the source of your freedom, when you sort of move beyond something that's compelling you in a certain way, you're compelling your behavior. Free means you can look all the time and make choices all the time, and you can have things come in front of you. I mean, I think that living the life, to me, being free means living the life of an observer. We can't control what happens to us in life, we never can, but we can observe what happens around us. And when things happen that feel good, that feel right in our hearts, we can move toward them. We're free to move toward them to see, what it is about. If something doesn't feel right, we can let it go. That's what I tell myself when I do my meditation. That's how I try to live my life. And that to me is a type of freedom. So.
You're right that free people are imperfect, but that their ideals are noble. What about literature? Is writing your real freedom today?
Is writing my real freedom today?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I did a lot of other things in my life and had good success at doing them, but I think my passion has always been working with words. It's what I love to do the most. And so I think, and I think so, I'm very blessed to be able to do that now. I'm incredibly blessed to be able to publish. Thank you, Xavier and La Matin. I'm very blessed to be able to publish here in France, and I feel very very grateful for what I'm able to do, and to have the opportunity to know that other people are reading it, and then having experiences like when someone tells me I learned something from your book and I liked it. This is like a dream come true to me, dream come true. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Bill Pearl. Merci beaucoup to be with us today and to give us such beautiful words.
Merci à vous. Merci.
Thank you.
Merci à tous.